Unfortunately, I don't have an Adidas tracksuit for this video. I'm sorry, but I will be squatting the whole time, so hopefully that makes it a bit better. I've also been listening to a lot of hard bass just to get myself in the mood. Suka bled.
Does this country really need an introduction? I don't think so. I think we all know how close it got to ruling the entire planet. This is just one of those places that was so close throughout history, they could almost taste it. To this day, they control more than 1/8 of all inhabitable land and is considered to be the largest country in the world in terms of territory by far. Let's specifically focus on the Russian Empire and how it, or the states that came before it, almost conquered the map. So remember how we talked about the Vikings in Eastern Europe and how we don't exactly know what they were doing over there? Well, that's not true entirely. We kind of do. Apparently one of them became king of a very early form of Russia. His lands were filled with Slavic tribes until he was asked to come on down and unite them. This place is Kievan Rus, and it would become the largest European state for a period of history. This Viking dynasty would remain in power for 700 years, and many royal European families would come to be connected to them in one way or another. They beat back these guys, which provided Kievan Rus access to the Black Sea, and also helped to improve their trade. It was now located in a perfect position on the continent to exchange furs, wax, and of course slaves. Yay! So they needed something to believe in, I guess, and they started shopping around for different religions. They decided against one in particular because it didn't allow for the consumption of alcohol. Instead, they chose the dude that was going around turning water into wine. Seems about right. They adopted Christianity, specifically Eastern Orthodox, which made certain places pretty happy with them. Kievan Rus was flexing all over Western Europe at this time with a superior economy, architecture, and literature. Many believe they were developing way faster than most other parts of the continent. Unfortunately though, their success would not last. While tensions increased from within, infighting broke out. Novgorod and other territories started doing their own thing, and if this wasn't already bad enough, an even bigger threat started to grow from the east. The Mongol horde was coming. Needless to say, with all these problems, they were about to be quickly overwhelmed by their invaders. Part of the problem was completely out of their control though. The decline of the Byzantine Empire really hurt their trade, and the Crusades caused European routes to change as well. If they kept a strong economy, they probably would have had less internal fighting. It would have been really interesting to see though, a united Kievan Rus take on this great Mongolian empire. Maybe they would have kept them at bay away from the rest of Europe. I mean, they were, as I said, considered much more advanced in certain areas compared to others, and it's not like the Mongols got much further than these lands anyways. Overextension was starting to become an issue for them.
Byzantium might have been a big help as well, if they also kept it together. Who knows? Maybe the two of them could have tag-teamed Genghis Khan. That's an image I want in my head.
The Mongols completely destroyed multiple cities, and most of this territory would be controlled by the Golden Horde. Though some areas would never fully recover, Mongolia left a lasting impact on the region. Russia would improve their transportation, organization, and military strategies while occupied, which honestly makes a lot of sense. These two places looked eerily similar at their peak, kinda. Maybe they were reincarnated or something. A fairly small state would slowly begin to kick out these invaders though, after about 100 years. As the Mongols declined, this Grand Duchy of Moscow ate up territory through war, purchase, and marriage. The rival at the time was Lithuania, just before they started ganging up with Poland, and they both competed for fragmented states in the region. These little guys were being forced to pay tribute to the Lithuanians, so many of them turned to Muscovy for help. Plus their alliance with Poland also shifted the balance of power, so something needed to be done. The Grand Prince of Moscow at the time, Ivan, and no, not the terrible one, we're gonna get to him a little later, was the great gatherer of Russian lands. He ended up tripling his state's size and putting an end to Mongolian dominance in his territory. He also re-annexed Novgorod and some of the other places. This was also around the time they got the idea of becoming a third Rome. This was the belief that Moscow was the successor to the ancient Roman Empire.
If this is the first one, and this is the second one, then the trilogy is gonna get finished up here, I guess? It's honestly not as crazy as some of the other claims in the past, so I think we can let it slide.
Some of these so-called Third Romes have kind of been like the Godfather trilogy. Part 1, outstanding. Part 2, a masterpiece. Part 3,
look at the mask of my boy.
Ivan would go on to destroy the former Mongolian invaders and ultimately divided them into much smaller states. Russia, which wasn't technically called Russia, but we're getting there, would also go on to construct a massive chain of fortification lines that kept their land safe. It was hundreds of kilometers long and kind of acted like the Russian equivalent to the Great Wall of China. 7 IV would become the Caesar of Russia and pretty much be like, hey, so I'm just gonna do whatever I want now, guys. Hopefully you're cool with that. Some people were not cool with that. His response was, so you've chosen death.
Totally understandable dude right here.
He'd find himself in a 25-year conflict called the Livonian War. Russia faced a coalition formed between Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Poland, and Lithuania, so obviously this wasn't gonna go well. This would end up being a humiliating defeat for Ivan, partly because he requested the truce himself at the end of the war. This empowered rivals like Sweden and Poland-Lithuania, which would continue to threaten them for decades after. They ended up losing a lot of important territory, but they would eventually get it back. Eventually. The thing is though, when they did get this stuff back after the Great Northern War, it solidified Russia as a great power far into the future. If they had just kept this stuff a little earlier, it'd been interesting to see what would have happened. Under his reign, the hordes would also momentarily come back and burn Moscow. Having a super important capital and all its buildings set on fire, probably not fun.
But actually, Moscow was burned several times throughout history, so this was just like a normal Tuesday for them.
Ivan IV wasn't completely terrible though. I mean, he did end up annexing and expanding his territory in the east, defeating many hordes in the process and increasing population. In time, they would reach the Ural Mountains and begin colonizing the rest of Siberia from there. But that's pretty much it in terms of positives. I just wanted to throw that out there. He's kind of responsible for leading Russia into a period known as the Time of Troubles, just right after his death. Civil wars broke out after his son died without an heir. This, combined with extremely harsh weather conditions, as well as disease for a few years, made things even worse. Russian winters sometimes backfire, believe it or not. Surprising, I know, but this is probably how they learned to use them to their advantage in the future. With all this internal chaos, their enemies were ready to pounce. I've talked about this once before, but it always seems to surprise people. Poland momentarily occupied the city of Moscow. So in a way, maybe the Polish started it. They started this little rivalry like hundreds of years earlier, and Russia just held on to a grudge. They actually still celebrate expelling Poland and Lithuania on November 4th every year. This is Russia's Unity Day. Oh, and also Sweden took some land away as well, but I think at this point the Russians were just happy their country survived this time of troubles. This was the closest Russia would ever come to complete collapse. Well, at least for a few centuries. Maybe if Ivan wasn't that bad, things would have been different. Or you know what? He didn't need to be the greatest leader or nicest leader of all time. All he had to do was, like, not kill his son and cause a succession crisis down the line. Allegedly, we don't know for sure. They somewhat stabilized under a new dynasty, and over the course of a century, slowly regained their former land. Although peasant uprisings were still kind of a frequent thing, Russia would get their revenge on their neighbors. After grabbing a part of Ukraine, and in order to stop a growing Ottoman Empire, Russia would sign the Treaty of Eternal Peace with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. You heard that correctly, the Treaty of Eternal Peace. Right. By the time Peter was running things, the Russian Empire would become the largest country in the world. They grabbed the Baltics, and this would be the beginning of their reign over this massive region. Peter was famous for modernizing and westernizing his empire, and he would turn Russia into a great power by the time of his death. But he also introduced a tax on men who didn't shave their beards. Something about being more European.
Luckily, I have the face of a 14-year-old girl. I wouldn't worry about anything.
Now, Russia at first thought there was a chance Siberia would be connected to Alaska. Obviously, it wasn't, but this would be the beginning of what's called Russian America. After explorers became the first Europeans to set foot in the northwestern part of the continent, ports would later begin to pop up across islands in the Pacific. These were mostly near Alaska, but the Russians also made it all the way down to Hawaii, surprisingly, which I like to imagine they kind of just showed up, still dressed all warm with their hats and everything. Aloha, comrades. Russian companies started making a fortune off of the furs from America, and this only increased interest across the country. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last forever though, and Russian Alaska didn't end up being all that profitable in the end. But their influence was still left on this region. Many Russian colonists married natives in these lands, and their surnames are actually still continued on to this day. Orthodox missionary work also left its impact on people as well. Though I should mention, native populations were not necessarily treated all that great. Surprise, surprise. As time went on, the British began to limit the trade in this area, and the Russian colonies had to rely on the US for a lot of their supplies at times. There actually wasn't that many Russians over here in the first place though. There was rarely over 1,000. So that was kind of a problem. Other issues like native revolts and wars back home forced them to give up here. They feared losing this land to the British, so Russia sold it to America instead. Could they have kept this colony throughout the decades? It's hard to say. Probably not, let's be real here. It seems super unlikely, but maybe if they stumbled upon it earlier, that could have helped. They did reach the Pacific Ocean in the 17th century. If they're lucky, they could have made it to America decades faster. They also needed to prioritize way more settlements though. They could have also just tried to keep Alaska, not necessarily expand it, just don't sell the territory. This would have definitely changed the Cold War. Allegedly, there were even stories that the Soviets didn't sell Alaska, but only leased it to the US for 100 years, and they were going to get it back. Yeah, I think the United States would be cool with that. Maybe if they asked nicely. Overall, the Russians had missteps during their rise that stopped their possible world domination run. There are actually many other things as well we can point to that might have changed the course of this nation. Let me know what else down below. This was only a couple. I'll be doing a part 2 for how the Soviets almost conquered the world in the last century, but for now, here were just a few chances the Russian Empire had.
Now I'm off to go buy a more authentic Russian costume. That's pretty important here for part 2. Also, still trying to work on my Soviet dance moves. This works, I think. I don't know, you guys let me know.
Sleeper 56, Nikkinagowa, MegaFatBoi 2.0, The Hentai Lover, Mymainmanmanny, Double Books, Huey Long Dong, Millatime, Alfonso M6, Brendan Hinkle, CooterDonkey, MisterPERKELE, Furry Cruz, Galli, Ben Moke, Maxy G, SwissAargau, Ruserification, Elijah Senpai, Elphie C. Thank you.